only women are eligible to play, but the league doesn't define what a woman is. And their anti-hate task force wrapped up their meeting yesterday without making a decision on that issue. A person familiar with the league indicates to Fox part of the reasoning comes down to the WNBA's refusal to bend to outside pressure, or what they call manufactured controversies. They point to Enes, Kanter Freedom, and Royce White's claims to join the WNBA draft, saying the recent declarations are plainly publicity stunts. We are not going to give oxygen to efforts designed to mock the league or use this topic to demean or marginalize others.
All right, so we have more updates on this whole WNBA chronicle because the league's emergency meeting has concluded, and at this current time, they're not changing any eligibility requirements, which should indicate that the boys, at least theoretically, ought to be able to play. To recap this whole story from the beginning, of course, this all began when you had the whole trans debate with Sophie Cunningham going on in the league, and a bunch of the players and coaches says, we support trans athletes, we want them playing alongside us. And so what happened in response is you have these absolute legends, former male NBA retired players such as Enes, Kanter, Freedom, and Royce White came out and said, okay, if you support trans athletes in the league, and by the way, the WNBA's rule book does not clearly specify or define what a woman is, then we're declaring for the WNBA draft. We're going to come enter the league. Of course, that incited a mass panic over at the WNBA leadership where they were calling this emergency commission. Oh, shoot, what do we do about this? Do we have to actually take a stand and make a definition of what a woman is? But after that commission has concluded, they basically said they're not going to be changing any rules, which is quite interesting. You could speculate the reasons for that. Maybe they couldn't come to an agreement because half of the, entities involved maybe are pushing the common sense position. The other half are pushing woke. They were just at a gridlock and they said, okay, let's pass nothing effectively. All they did was issue some vague statement about how they don't like people being so divisive on this issue, to which I say, do you care to actually address the point itself, right? But regardless, as I said, they should allow the male players, at least theoretically, to play if the guidelines are not changing, which I've been clear since the beginning. I am absolutely rooting for them, okay? I fully affirm the identity of people like Enes Kanter and Royce White. Look at the beautiful women that they are. And after all, by the way, this is what the leftists asked for, right? I mean, you can't have this both ways. You can't go out and say we support the trans athletes and then complain when said athletes, the men, come and play in your sport, And frankly, I personally think that make the WNBA a lot more entertaining. Sure, is it sort of late stage society nonsense? Yes. On the other hand, it would be utterly hilarious, and it would force the virtue signaling audience of the WNBA as well as the players to actually really address, the logical consequences of their own ideas. So leftists can't complain that we're giving them exactly what they want. But that is, of course, what they are doing, which we'll also react to today, because the new attack line, apparently, against the male NBA players is that, oh, this is just performative. This is a divisive PR stunt. To which I say, are you refusing to affirm the gender identity of Enes Kanter, Freedom, and Royce White? How dare you? How transphobic of you. According to you, how they feel, how they identify is what they are. That's all that there is to gender identity. So what's going on here? Oh, but you're doing it as a joke. How do you know that? How do you know that? Royce White put on a wig and everything. I thought that's enough to be a woman, right? Don't get mad at us because we're, again, giving you exactly what you want. But anyways, let's talk about it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, let's take a listen to these fuming CNN leftists talk about the whole situation because, the irony is not lost on us. I guess I'll put it that way.
Appears to be performance, publicity stunt, whatever you want to call it. The WNBA commissioner said that player eligibility remains the same, and preserving the integrity of our game and ensuring fair competition will always remain among the league's highest priorities. How likely is this move going to advance the league's discussions here? What do you think about that?
I think that the PA, the Players Association, as well as the league will probably be a little more clear about what they mean by women playing in the WNBA. I think, unfortunately, those two retired players were looking for some attention and trying to prove a point. And they may have gotten the attention and proved the point they wanted, but they've just added to what I believe is such a disheartening time for a league that's been around for 30 years, correct? And it's still very young in terms of what a league should look like, a professional league should look like. And they have just gotten to the point where they finally have the attention that they deserve, that they've worked so hard for all of these years, and people are co-opting this message. Now, Pamela, I know you know this, but when this league started, these women, it was sweat equity. It was for the love of the game. They were making maybe $15,000 a year, and they had other side jobs. They were doing it because they loved to play basketball, because there was no professional league for women. And so now we have people changing the entire conversation, and they don't deserve this. It's really unfortunate. And the true fans, the fans who have been here from the beginning, not these flyover fans who just joined, who are causing the ruckus, are really disappointed, because there's some excellent basketball being played by these ladies, and they will continue to keep the main thing, and try to quiet this narrative, oh, what is a woman playing in sports? I think we shouldn't even answer those questions. I understand Sophie felt like she had to say something, but there's no way in today's political climate that you can answer a question like that without someone else giving you some push and some shove about what you're really trying to say.
Okay, so this argument is completely incoherent. You know, the whole premise is that, oh, these male grandstanders are just taking attention away from women's basketball. They're ruining the sport with their politics. But I'd point out, as basically everyone should know, the male NBA players never started this. They simply responded to what was already happening, okay? You can say that Sophie Cunningham answered a question in an interview, fine. But who made it an entire league-wide push to say, we want transgenders playing in our sport? That was not Enes Kanter Freedom. That was not Royce White. It was people like, for example, the coach of the Minnesota Lynx and others who proudly stated, we support trans and we especially support trans athletes. Who was wearing a trans kids belong shirt, by the way, sideline at the game? That was the Minnesota Lynx coach. Now they're claiming, of course, that it's the conservatives, it's those damn right-wingers who are politicizing this sport. No, you guys started it. And look, here's the thing. Honestly, we're not even really trying to fight you over it. We're actually indeed saying, if this is what you want, go ahead. You know, we're actually being charitable. I guess Christmas came early in many ways because we're giving you exactly what you asked for. And of course, she also makes the point that, well, it's so unfortunate because these women have fought so hard to be noticed. Finally, the WNBA is semi-mainstream, and now all of that's being taken away or distracted from. To which I say, you know, first of all, whose actual fault is that? And secondly, we made this point before, but you know how I know on some levels that regardless of how much people try to make it into a serious sport, the WNBA in many ways is fundamentally unserious, is the fact that, okay, you know, if that's true, all of you women in the past and present have been scratching and clawing for recognition, and finally you have your moment where you're on ESPN and all this stuff. Okay, I totally get it. So if you fought so hard for this spot and you were serious about that, wouldn't you seek to preserve it, right? Because obviously it goes without saying that if trans athletes, if men in the WNBA become a normal thing, they're not only going to destroy you on the court, they're going to take your spot. There's limited spots on rosters. They're going to, by nature, objectively, take quote unquote opportunities away from the female athletes who have spent their whole life fighting for it. Yes, that's the entire point. So, right, why are you getting mad at us when we perhaps raise that very point and then, you know, oh, you're just being divisive? Well, trans athletes are a thing. You guys have been promoting them, by the way. Your own league has been promoting them, so it's not exactly as if we brought this to the conversation. And, you know, that it really is that simple. And by the way, you could simply, if you want to put this issue to bed and you really cared about it, okay, define what a woman is. That's it. That's all you have to do, and you can shut down this debate forever. Oh, but you won't do that because you guys would rather be virtue signaling progressive activists, but when push comes to shove and people actually present you with the logical consequence of your ideas, you know, not just this fantasy you have in your head or some type of Instagram graphic or whatever, then you say, oh, well, that's just right-wingers crashing the party. They're just ruining it all. How? Why? Right? But, you know, anyways, Of course, today, as I mentioned, that meeting did indeed take place. And take a listen to this. The WNBA is condemning, quote, bad faith efforts to fuel the transgender player debate, which I assume is supposed to be vaguely referring to Enes Kanter and his buddy. But again, why is it bad faith? Are you saying he's not a woman? Okay. And this is, of course, what's hilarious about it is, besides the mere nature of the biology in which you were born with, the WNBA maybe could have tried to make a line where it's like, I don't know, you have to be on hormones or have a sex change surgery or something like that to identify as a woman. But then that would also be transphobic because, again, let's not forget, you know, according to these people, the gender fluid crowd, why can't a woman have a beard? Why can't a woman, you know, have completely male hormones and not even be on estrogen? It's about how you feel in here, because otherwise you don't really have much of a standard you can apply objectively. But hilariously, they didn't even do that, so it doesn't matter. Apparently, the league is saying there are no immediate eligibility matters, and thus far, they have not changed the rules. The WNBA union has said that players will not be, quote, political pawns. Which, again, okay, if you don't want them to be that, then ban men from the league. This is all we're telling you should do, right? And they're mad at us. We're the ones ruining the women's sport, apparently. Okay, anyways, here's what they said. So the WNBA on Wednesday criticized those trying to create a narrative about transgender women playing in the league. It's not a narrative. It's a real issue across many different forms of sport. Frankly, the WNBA is lucky they haven't had to deal with this thus far, but it's coming. It's coming. There are no immediate eligibility matters affecting the WNBA, and we strongly denounce the bad faith efforts. Why is it bad faith? I repeat, to use these topics to demean or marginalize others. We haven't done so, by the way. What I have, of course, said is that true trans women athletes like Enes Kanter Freedom and Royce White should have the right to play. So I don't see who's being demeaning. The only person being demeaning is, of course, you saying that, well, that's clearly a man. He has a beard. He played in the male NBA league. Okay, Bruce Jenner was a male Olympian. What is your point? According to you, these are women. So what's the problem, right? What's the problem? But this came hours after an anti-hate task force, well, if they're called that, we probably know where they stood, met virtually and discussed a variety of topics, including social media vitriol and transgender athletes. Of course, the league's collective bargaining statement states that, quote, only players who are women are eligible to play in the WNBA, but does not include any more specific language about gender identity or sex assigned at birth. Of course, last Friday, 2 former NBA players said that they identified as women. And, you know, here's the thing. You know, we go through this whole article, but basically, to make a long story short, it ended in gridlock. They provided a complete non-answer. So you can see right here, quote, we recognize that this is a complex and nuanced topic, which is a total PR thing to say. You know, it's a complex issue, you know. It's not, by the way, it's not nuanced, but according to them it is. So anyways, and we will continue to have important conversations with all of you and the players in the weeks and months ahead. We also plan to convene additional discussions and offer listening sessions for any team leaders who would like to participate. Your perspectives are invaluable, and I appreciate those who have already reached out to share their thoughts. So that read like a statement right out of the European Union. You know, if you ever listen to them, what is that even supposed to mean? But the Players Union also issued a statement on Friday condemning the, quote, hate, abuse, and demonization of transgender people, while saying it would continue to engage in difficult discussions. Okay, well, if that's where you stand, then indeed, you know, you publicly said, invite men to the league. There you go. So as it currently stands, by my understanding, Enes Kanter Freedom has not been banned from the WNBA. In fact, unless the league makes a change, which it sounds like they're not going to be, I look forward to finally watching the WNBA next year, because this is going to be an incredible pinnacle of sport right here, okay? They're calling this the greatest WNBA career, the greatest single basketball career of all time.
The commissioner of the WNBA message every GM, and they're still trying to figure out what a woman is. And they are actually having a meeting this week. It's been around for 30 years. So think about how disrespectful that statement to all the players who actually played in that league in their history. So if they can't define what a woman is.
Yeah, well, I want to be clear. I cannot give enough credit to these guys because this is such a good idea. I just wonder why we didn't think of it sooner. And in fairness, we talked about it, but no one actually stepped up and said, I'm going to do that. And frankly, if we had done this about 10 years ago, we could have just permanently ended the trans sports debate already. Either way, either men are permanently banned or women's sports are completely destroyed, which would have just been pure entertainment. I don't know. But I'm even thinking back to my own high school athletic career and youth athletic career, you know, track, tackle football, a little bit of basketball. And I just think to myself, you know, why did I make it so hard on myself? Why did I put my body through all that? Got injured a couple times, all that stuff. You know how it goes, right? Why did I train so hard to make All Valley, the, you know, championship for the 100 when I could have just ran against the girls and I would have had a stack of gold medals already, you know? Like what were we doing, boys? What were we doing our whole lives? Why were we trying so hard? We could have just, you know, it's just kind of you know, makes you feel like Uncle Rico and Napoleon Dynamite, right? What could have been had we just competed against girls all our lives, right? But you know, there you basically have it. Of course, it does go without saying that, you know, this shouldn't be much of a debate to begin with. It should be easy. But the fact that, of course, they have to approach this as a complex and nuanced debate tells you a lot, tells you everything you need to know. And by the way, tells you that woke isn't truly dead. We made the whole point when AOC said, oh, woke 1 was crazy. Okay, well, that by nature implies there's a woke 2. And I think you're already seeing that right now, right? Trump won the election, all this stuff. These people kind of retreated into a hole for a while. But do bear in mind, they haven't changed. And maybe this is a good cultural issue to sort of remind the world about that, right? You could say it doesn't directly impact politics, but the same could have been said about Dylan Mulvaney and Bud Light, right? Ever since that happened, you notice the quote unquote woke 1 has been kind of taking a little bit, laying it low a little bit, right? But look, it's still 100% there, and they still believe it's complex and nuanced, apparently, whether men have a natural competitive advantage over women in sports. And it's funny, I saw someone trying to argue about this today, saying that, well, there's no proof of that. There's no proof that a quote unquote biological male has an advantage over a female. And they tried to point out examples. Well, look, you know, here's a situation where like the trans athlete didn't win. They came in second place, right? There was a biological woman who beat the trans. Therefore, clearly the trans has no natural advantage. And that's, by the way, that's basically like the only argument they're able to make is that, oh, there's no proof, even though there is proof, it's called common sense. But then even beyond that, so, you know, the argument I would make about that too, then, okay, so why can I not take anabolic steroids and then go play sports against other guys, right? Because that's usually been the argument, is that here's why men have a natural advantage. You can observe it. It's very real. It's not made up. But you look at things like hormones, testosterone levels, muscle mass that you're kind of naturally built with, and you know, you're carrying, bone density, even things like that, right? We already know that whole conversation. But, you know, here's the thing. If you're going to claim that's not an advantage because of hormones or whatever, then, okay, by that logic, right? Here's what the logic would be then. So, for example, if I took anabolic steroids and I went to go play in, I don't know, let's say the NFL or something, and Patrick Mahomes is still a better quarterback than me, or, I mean, I played running back in football. So let's say like Derrick Henry is still a better running back than I would be, even if I were the one taking steroids and he was not. Okay, so does that therefore prove then, by the pro-trans logic, right? Does that therefore prove there's no inherent advantage to anabolic steroids? It doesn't give you an unfair competitive advantage? Because look, here's an anecdotal case where the person with the unfair advantage still lost to the person who doesn't have it. So, okay, so why can't we take steroids, right? Same logic there. Because, yeah, if some very athletic woman out there still manages to beat a transgender who is a biological male, okay, so then they try to say that's proof of not having a competitive advantage. But that's the thing. Just because you have a competitive advantage still doesn't mean that you win, right? Even if you cheat in a game, cheating in a game, for example, doesn't guarantee you're going to win the game. It just gives you an unfair advantage where the fair competition of sport is now thrown out the window. And that's the entire point, right? So usually a person who's cheating at a game is much more likely to win, right? They're giving themselves an unfair advantage. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to win. That's not even the point. The point ought to be at its core, yes, this is an unfair advantage that exists. We can clearly see that it's an unfair advantage. It's sort of a way to hack the game itself. Therefore, you shouldn't be allowed to do it, right? In the same sense that people who are taking HGH, human growth hormone, or steroids are typically banned from competitive sports. Okay, So then the same should apply by biology, right? If you're born with significantly more testosterone, and that gives you, by the way, even if you are taking testosterone blockers, you still have that male body you're born with, right? Your bones are already grown in. You still have more muscle mass on average, right? So obviously that's a competitive advantage. And the fact that like this is a societal debate, obviously kind of shows you how far gone everything is, but just wanted to address that as well, because I saw that people trying to bring that up earlier today. And by the way, trans activists, that doesn't justify your position. It still doesn't make sense just because you say, oh, well, here's a case where a trans lost to a woman. That's not the point. There are absolutely women out there who, if you compare the top ring of athletic women in the world versus some like average out of shape guy, yeah, in some cases, you'll have women who are more athletic than a man or stronger than a man. Like that can happen. That does exist. Does it therefore disprove the entire nature of biology that men are naturally just born with a physical advantage over women? No, it doesn't. It's not how it works. But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.